The fluorescent lights in Captain Marcus Rivara's office hummed with an irritating persistence, casting harsh shadows across the cluttered desk where Agent Sarah Chun's personnel file lay open like an accusation. Rivera leaned back in his worn leather chair, the springs creaking under his weight as he studied the young woman standing at rigid attention before him. Her uniform was pristine, pressed to military perfection. But something about her stillness unnerved him in a way he couldn't quite articulate. "Agent Chun," Rivera began, his voice carrying the weight of 23 years of military service and the particular brand of condescension reserved for those he deemed unworthy. "I've reviewed your file 3 times, and frankly, I'm baffled by your request." Chen remained motionless, her dark eyes fixed on a point somewhere above Rivera's head. Her breathing was steady, controlled, but if Rivera had been more observant, he might have noticed the subtle shift in her posture, the way her weight had imperceptibly moved to the balls of her feet, the slight loosening of her shoulders that spoke of coiled readiness rather than relaxation. "Operation Nightfall," Rivera continued, savoring each word as he prepared to demolish her aspirations. "Do you have any idea what you're asking for? This isn't some training exercise or desk assignment. This is a deep-cover infiltration of the Kozlov Arms Cartel, the most dangerous criminal organization operating in Eastern Europe. These people don't just kill their enemies. They make art out of it." He flipped through her file with theatrical deliberation, each page turn punctuated by a dismissive grunt. "Let's see. 24 years old. Graduated from the academy with honors. Yes, but that was 18 months ago. Since then, you've been assigned to intelligence analysis. Desk work." He looked up at her with barely concealed disgust. "0 field operations. 0 confirmed kills. 0 real-world experience beyond pushing papers and filing reports." Chum's fingers twitched a movement so slight it barely registered. But in that microsecond, she had calculated the exact trajectory needed to drive Rivera's letter opener through his carotid artery. The thought passed through her mind like a whisper, cataloged and dismissed with professional detachment. Her training had taught her patience, and patience was a weapon as deadly as any blade. Furthermore, Rivera pressed on, warming to his theme. "You're what, 5'4"? Maybe 120 pounds soaking wet? The Kozlov organization doesn't exactly recruit from the local cheerleading squad. Agent Chun, these are hardened criminals, ex-military, former Spetsnaz operators who eat little girls like you for breakfast." The insult hung in the air like smoke, but Chun's expression remained unchanged. Inside her mind, however, she was already moving. In the span of a heartbeat, she had identified 17 different ways to kill Rivera using only the objects within arm's reach. The heavy glass paperweight could crush his skull. The metal desk lamp could be weaponized in 3 distinct ways. And the decorative flag pole in the corner would make an excellent spear. Her eyes never moved, never betrayed the lethal calculations running through her consciousness like a deadly algorithm. Rivera stood up, his chair rolling backward as he began to pace behind his desk. "I've seen the intelligence reports on this operation. The Kozlov cartel has been responsible for arms deals that have destabilized 3 governments and funded terrorist operations across 2 continents. Their security is impenetrable, their paranoia legendary. They've killed undercover agents from the CIA, MI6, and the FSB. What makes you think a rookie analyst with delusions of grandeur could succeed where seasoned operatives have failed?" He stopped pacing and leaned forward, his hands planted firmly on the desk as he stared directly into Chun's eyes. "I'll tell you what I think, Agent Chun. I think you've been watching too many movies. I think you've confused real life with some Hollywood fantasy where the pretty young agent saves the day through sheer determination and a winning smile. This isn't a game. This is life and death, and I won't have your blood on my hands because you couldn't accept your limitations." Chun's breathing had shifted now, settling into the rhythm she had learned in places that didn't officially exist. From instructors whose names were classified above Rivera's clearance level. It was a combat breathing pattern designed to optimize oxygen flow and maintain perfect calm in the moments before violence erupted. Her heart rate had actually decreased as Rivera's insults intensified, a physiological response that would have terrified him if he had understood its significance. "Look at you," Rivera continued, his voice rising with each word. "Standing there like a statue, probably thinking this is all some kind of test. Well, here's your test result. You fail. You fail because you don't have the experience, you don't have the skills. And you sure as hell don't have the physical presence to intimidate anyone more dangerous than a parking meter." He walked around the desk now, circling her like a predator, unaware that he had positioned himself perfectly for what Chun's training manual classified as Elimination Sequence 7, a series of movements that would render him unconscious in 2.3 seconds and dead in 4.7 seconds, depending on her intent. The irony was not lost on her that Rivera, in his attempt to demonstrate dominance, had made himself completely vulnerable. "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Rivera's voice had dropped to a harsh whisper as he stopped directly in front of her. "I see a little girl playing dress-up in a soldier's uniform. I see someone who's never felt the weight of real responsibility, never had to make the kind of decisions that keep you awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering if you made the right choice." Chun's lips curved upward in the faintest suggestion of a smile, not the nervous expression of a chastened recruit, but something else entirely. Something that spoke of secrets and shadows, of knowledge that existed in the spaces between official reports and classified briefings. It was the smile of someone who had indeed made those decisions Rivera spoke of, who had felt that weight, who had stared at ceilings in safe houses across 3 continents while the ghosts of her choices whispered in the darkness. "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive," Rivera continued, oblivious to the subtle change in Chun's demeanor. "I've seen good soldiers die because they overestimated their abilities and underestimated their enemies. I've written letters to parents explaining why their children aren't coming home. I won't add your name to that list because you couldn't accept that some jobs require more than enthusiasm and a clean service record." He returned to his chair, settling back with the satisfied air of a man who believed he had delivered a necessary truth. "So here's what's going to happen, Agent Chun. You're going to return to your desk, continue your analysis work, and maybe in 5 or 10 years, when you've gained some actual experience, we can revisit the possibility of field operations. Until then, I suggest you focus on what you're actually qualified to do, paperwork." Rivera reached for Chun's file, preparing to close it with the finality of a coffin lid. "Little girls should stick to desk jobs, Agent Chun. Leave the real work to the professionals." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a gauntlet thrown down before someone who had spent years learning to pick up such gauntlets and use them as weapons. Chen's smile widened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time since entering the office, she moved a casual gesture, reaching across the desk as if to retrieve her rejected application, her sleeve riding up just enough to reveal the edge of something crimson against her pale skin. The crimson ink caught the harsh fluorescent light like a drop of fresh blood, and Captain Rivera's triumphant expression froze mid-sneer. His eyes locked onto the partial symbol emerging from beneath Chun's sleeve, just the tip of what appeared to be a blade, rendered in scarlet so vivid it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The color was wrong, too saturated, too deliberate to be some amateur tattoo parlor work. This was something else entirely. "What?" Rivera's voice cracked slightly, the word dying in his throat as Chun's fingers deliberately moved to her cuff. She didn't look at him as she slowly, methodically began to roll back her sleeve, the movement precise and controlled, like a magician revealing the final act of a deadly trick. More of the tattoo emerged with each fold of fabric, the fuller outline of an ornate dagger, its blade seeming to drip with crimson that had been inked with such skill it appeared three-dimensional. Rivera's mouth went dry as recognition began to dawn, a cold dread spreading through his chest like ice water in his veins. He had heard whispers of this symbol in classified briefings, seen it referenced in documents that required clearance levels he didn't possess, spoken of in hushed tones by intelligence officers who looked over their shoulders, even in secure facilities. "Agent Chun," Rivera whispered, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. "What is that?" Chun finally looked at him, and Rivera felt his world tilt on its axis. The meek, nervous recruit was gone, replaced by something that made his survival instincts scream warnings he was only now beginning to understand. Her dark eyes held depths he hadn't noticed before, not the uncertainty of youth, but the cold calculation of someone who had seen things that existed in the shadows, between official reports and sanitized briefings. "You were asking about my qualifications, Captain," Chun said, her voice carrying a new edge that cut through the air like a blade. She continued rolling up her sleeve with deliberate slowness, revealing more of the intricate artwork that adorned her forearm. "Perhaps you'd like to see my credentials." The full tattoo emerged like a revelation from hell. The Scarlet Dagger was exquisitely detailed, its blade appearing to weep drops of blood that seemed to move in the shifting light. Surrounding the central weapon were 13 stars arranged in a precise pattern that Rivera recognized from intelligence briefings he wasn't supposed to remember. But it was the small inscription beneath the dagger that made his blood turn to ice. Omega-7, Omega Group. Designation 7. Rivera's hands began to shake as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami of realization. Omega Group, the unit that didn't officially exist. The operatives who were ghosts in the machine of military intelligence. The ones who handled problems that were too sensitive, too dangerous, or too morally ambiguous for conventional forces. He had heard rumors, fragments of conversations that stopped when he entered rooms, references in classified documents that were redacted even at his clearance level. "Impossible," he breathed, his voice barely audible. "You're too young. The psychological profiles alone. The psychological profiles are classified above your pay grade." "Captain," Chun interrupted, her tone now carrying the authority of someone who had operated in places that didn't appear on any map, as is my actual service record. "What you've been reading is my cover identity, Sarah Chun, intelligence analyst, fresh from the academy. A very carefully constructed fiction designed to allow me to move through military bureaucracy without raising questions." She took a step closer to his desk, and Rivera instinctively leaned back in his chair. The movement was subtle, but Chun caught it, and her lips curved into that same predatory smile that had appeared moments before. "You want to know about my qualifications?" "My real qualifications?" Rivera nodded mutely, his throat too constricted to form words. "I've been operational for 7 years, Chun continued, her voice taking on the matter-of-fact tone of someone reciting a grocery list rather than a catalog of violence. "My first assignment was in Chechnya when I was 17 officially. I was attending my senior year of high school. Unofficially, I was eliminating an arms dealer who had been supplying weapons to terrorist cells across the Caucasus region." She moved around his desk now, the same path Rivera had taken during his earlier tirade, but where his movement had been theatrical dominance. Hers was the calculated positioning of a predator. "Since then, I've operated in 43 countries across 6 continents. I speak 9 languages fluently and can pass for a native in 12 different cultural contexts. I've eliminated 47 high-value targets, dismantled 6 terrorist networks, and prevented 3 separate attempts to acquire weapons-grade plutonium. Rivera's face had gone pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the office's air conditioning. 47, he whispered. Confirmed kills, Chun clarified, stopping directly in front of him. That number doesn't include casualties from larger operations or individuals who died as indirect consequences of my actions. The actual body count is significantly higher, but Omega Group only tracks direct eliminations for statistical purposes. She leaned against his desk, her posture casual but her eyes never leaving his face. You mentioned the Kozlov cartel security being impenetrable. I've already been inside their organization twice, once in Prague 3 years ago when I eliminated their former weapons procurement specialist, and again in Istanbul last year when I extracted intelligence about their nuclear material trafficking operations. They never knew I was there. Rivera's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was hearing. The young woman he had been berating moments before was revealing herself to be one of the most dangerous individuals on the planet, someone whose very existence was a state secret. But you look so young, innocent, harmless? Chen's smile widened, and Rivera caught a glimpse of something that made his blood freeze. That's the point, Captain. People see what they expect to see. A young Asian woman in a military uniform reads as non-threatening to most individuals, particularly men with traditional views about gender roles and physical capability. It's an advantage I've cultivated and exploited throughout my career. She straightened up, and Rivera noticed for the first time the way she moved, not the nervous energy of a rookie, but the fluid grace of someone whose body was a precisely calibrated weapon. The Kozlov organization has killed undercover agents from multiple intelligence services, as you mentioned, but they've never encountered an Omega operative. We don't work the same way as conventional intelligence assets. We don't rely on covers that can be blown or networks that can be compromised. We are the weapon, Captain. We are the entire operation. Rivera's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his earlier confidence completely shattered. The woman standing before him represented everything he had never understood about the true nature of modern warfare, the shadow conflicts fought by individuals who existed in the spaces between official acknowledgement and plausible deniability. You asked about my physical presence, Chun continued, her voice now carrying an undertone that made Rivera's survival instinct scream. Whether I could intimidate dangerous criminals. Let me ask you something. Captain, how do you feel right now? Intimidated? Because I haven't even begun to show you what I'm capable of. The office fell silent except for the humming of the fluorescent lights and the sound of Rivera's increasingly rapid breathing. Chun stood perfectly still, but her presence seemed to fill the room like a gathering storm. And Rivera finally understood that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment, one that could have consequences far beyond his ability to comprehend. The silence in Captain Rivera's office stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Chun remained motionless, but her stillness had transformed from the rigid posture of a subordinate to the predatory calm of an apex predator studying its prey. Rivera could feel sweat trickling down his spine as the full weight of his situation began to settle over him like a suffocating blanket. You were saying something about desk jobs, Captain? Chun's voice had undergone a complete metamorphosis, each word now carrying the razor-sharp precision of someone accustomed to having her statements treated as gospel truth. The meek analyst was gone, replaced by something that made Rivera's hindbrain scream warnings about immediate and mortal danger. She took another step closer, and Rivera's hand instinctively moved toward his service weapon before freezing as he realized the futility of the gesture. Omega operatives were legendary for their close-quarters combat abilities, stories whispered in intelligence. Circles spoke of agents who could kill with their bare hands faster than most people could draw a weapon. The thought of trying to outdraw someone who had been trained to eliminate targets in fractions of seconds suddenly seemed not just foolish, but suicidal. "I'm curious about something," Chun continued, tilting her head slightly as she studied Revire's increasingly panicked expression. "In your 23 years of service, how many people have you actually killed, Captain? Not ordered killed, not been responsible for deaths in some abstract command capacity, but personally, directly eliminated with your own hands?" Rivera's mouth worked soundlessly, his throat constricted with fear. The question hung in the air like an accusation, and they both knew the answer. His combat experience consisted primarily of logistics and command positions. Safely removed from the actual violence he had spent the last 20 minutes glorifying. "I thought so," Chun said softly, her tone carrying a note of something that might have been pity if it hadn't been so terrifying. "You speak about killing as if it's some abstract concept, something that happens in movies or video games. You have no idea what it actually means to take a life, do you?" She moved to his desk and picked up the heavy glass paperweight he had been using to hold down classified documents. Rivera watched in horrified fascination as she examined it with the clinical interest of someone evaluating a tool. "This, for instance. In the right hands, this becomes a weapon capable of crushing a human skull with a single blow. The key is understanding the precise angle of impact and the amount of force required to achieve immediate incapacitation versus prolonged suffering." Rivera's face had gone ashen as Chun casually set the paperweight back down and moved to examine the metal desk lamp. "This has multiple applications. The base can be used as a bludgeon, the cord as a garrote, and the bulb can be broken to create an improvised cutting implement. I once eliminated a target in Minsk using nothing but a similar lamp and 37 seconds. "Agent Chun," Rivera managed to croak, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's definitely been a misunderstanding," Chun agreed, her smile returning with renewed intensity. "But it's entirely on your part, Captain. You see, you spent the last 20 minutes insulting, belittling, and dismissing someone who has killed more people than you've probably met in your entire military career. Someone who has operated in environments where your survival depends on split-second decisions and the willingness to do whatever is necessary to complete the mission." She walked to the window, gazing out at the military base beyond with the detached interest of someone who had seen similar installations across the globe. "You mentioned that I've never felt the weight of real responsibility, never had to make decisions that keep me awake at night. Would you like to know about some of those decisions, Captain?" Rivera shook his head frantically, but Chun continued as if he hadn't responded. 3 years ago in Somalia, I had to choose between saving a busload of schoolchildren and maintaining my cover to prevent a nuclear weapon from reaching terrorist hands. I chose the mission. 43 children died in the explosion that followed, but the nuclear device was intercepted and neutralized. I can still hear their screams when I close my eyes. The casual way she delivered this information made Rivera's stomach lurch. This wasn't the boastful recounting of a soldier trying to impress. This was the matter-of-fact recitation of someone who had made peace with the darkest aspects of her profession. Or perhaps you'd prefer to hear about the time in Prague when I had to seduce and eliminate an arms dealer who reminded me of my own father, Chun continued, her voice never wavering from its conversational tone. I spent 3 weeks building a relationship with him, learning about his family, his hopes for the future, his genuine love for his daughter who was studying medicine in Vienna. Then I poisoned his wine during what he thought was going to be a romantic dinner and watched him die while he told me he was falling in love with me. Rivera's hands were shaking uncontrollably now, and he gripped the arms of his chair to try to maintain some semblance of composure. The woman standing before him was describing acts that existed far beyond his comprehension of military service. Operations that blurred the lines between soldier and assassin, between duty and murder. But my personal favorite, Chun said, turning back to face him with that predatory smile, was the mission in Chechnya I mentioned earlier. My first kill. I was 17 years old, posing as a refugee seeking passage out of the region. The target was a man named Dmitry Volkov, who had been selling weapons to both sides of the conflict while skimming profits to fund his own private army. She moved closer to Rivara's desk again, and he pressed himself back into his chair as if trying to merge with the leather upholstery. Volkov thought he was helping a frightened teenage girl. He offered me food, shelter, protection. He even gave me a photograph of his own daughter, who was about my age, and told me he hoped someone would help her if she were ever in my situation. Chun's eyes had taken on a distant quality, as if she were seeing something beyond the confines of the office. I slit his throat while he slept, Captain. A 17-year-old girl killed a man who had shown her nothing but kindness, because that was the mission. Because sometimes the greater good requires us to become monsters. The office fell silent again, but this time the quiet was pregnant with menace. Rivera could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could feel the cold sweat soaking through his uniform. The woman standing before him had just confessed to acts that would haunt most people for the rest of their lives. And she had done so with the same emotional detachment someone might use to discuss the weather. So when you ask me about my qualifications, Chun said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, when you question whether I have the experience or the psychological fortitude to handle a dangerous mission, I want you to understand exactly who you're talking to. I am not some fresh-faced recruit playing at being a soldier. I am a weapon that has been forged in the fires of necessity and tempered by the blood of 47 human beings who died because I was very, very good at my job. She leaned forward, placing both hands on his desk, and Rivera caught a glimpse of something in her eyes that made his soul recoil. The question isn't whether I'm qualified for Operation Nightfall, Captain. The question is whether you're qualified to be in the same room as someone like me. The air in Captain Rivera's office had become suffocating, thick with the weight of revelations that had fundamentally altered the balance of power in the room. Chun straightened slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled, while Rivera remained frozen in his chair like a rabbit caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. The transformation was complete. The nervous recruit had vanished entirely, replaced by something that belonged in the darkest corners of military intelligence. Now that we've established my credentials, Chun said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, let's discuss the real reason I'm here, Captain. Operation Nightfall isn't a request I'm making. It's an assignment I've already been given by people whose names you'll never know, operating from facilities that don't appear on any organizational chart. She reached into her jacket pocket, and Rivera's entire body tensed as his mind conjured images of concealed weapons and swift, silent death. Instead, Chun withdrew a sleek black smartphone that looked like no device Rivera had ever seen its surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And the screen displayed symbols that definitely weren't standard military issue. You see, Captain, while you've been sitting here playing gatekeeper, actual decisions have been made at levels of command that exist so far above your authority that you might as well be a civilian. Chun continued, her fingers dancing across the device's surface with practiced ease. The Pentagon's Special Activities Division identified the Kozlov cartel as a clear and present danger to national security 6 months ago. The decision to eliminate their leadership structure was made by people who answer directly to individuals whose existence is classified above your clearance level. Rivera watched in growing horror as Chun's phone displayed what appeared to be a real-time satellite feed of the very building they were sitting in. The image was so detailed he could make out individual vehicles in the parking lot. And a small red dot pulsed steadily in what he realized was his exact office location. "Your cooperation was hoped for," Chun said, noting his fixation on the screen, but it was never required. Omega Group operates with what we call universal override authority. That means when we say we need something, we get it, regardless of local command structure or bureaucratic obstacles. Your approval of my mission parameters is about as relevant as a weather report from Mars. She touched another section of the screen, and Rivera's own personnel file appeared, but this version contained information he had never seen before. Psychological evaluations, financial records, medical history, even details about his ex-wife's current living situation and his daughter's college performance. The level of surveillance was breathtaking and terrifying. However, Chun continued, her tone taking on a note that made Rivera's blood run cold. Your behavior during this meeting has been problematic. You see, Omega Group maintains detailed psychological profiles on all military personnel we might potentially interact with. Your file indicated a tendency towards sexism and age discrimination, but the extent of your unprofessionalism has exceeded even our worst-case projections. Rivera's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as he tried to process the implications of what she was telling him. Not only had his entire tirade been pointless, but it had been anticipated, monitored, and was now being evaluated by people who existed in the shadows of the military-industrial complex. Chun's fingers moved across the phone screen again, and this time Rivera heard a soft chiming sound that seemed to come from the device itself. I'm now filing a formal report with my handlers regarding your conduct during this briefing. Your comments about little girls and desk jobs will be noted, along with your complete failure to recognize the security implications of my cover identity. Agent Chun, Rivera managed to croak, his voice barely audible. I had no way of knowing. That's precisely the point. Captain, Chun interrupted, her eyes never leaving the phone screen as she continued typing with mechanical precision. You had no way of knowing, which means you should have exercised caution and professional courtesy rather than launching into a misogynistic rant based on incomplete information. In the intelligence community, assumptions kill people. Your assumptions could have compromised a mission of national importance. She looked up from the device, and Rivera felt his soul shrivel under her gaze. Let me paint you a picture of what could have happened if I had been a genuine rookie seeking assignment to a dangerous mission. Your verbal abuse and dismissive attitude could have driven me to seek alternative channels to prove myself. Perhaps I might have attempted unauthorized contact with criminal elements, or tried to gather intelligence on my own to demonstrate my capabilities. Such actions could have alerted the Kozlov organization to official interest in their activities, potentially causing them to alter their security protocols or relocate their operations. The scenario she described unfolded in Rivera's mind like a nightmare, each possibility more catastrophic than the last. He began to understand that his behavior hadn't just been unprofessional, it had been potentially treasonous in its implications. Fortunately, Chun continued, I am not a rookie, and your incompetence will not compromise this mission. But your conduct will be reviewed by people who take a very dim view of officers who allow personal prejudices to interfere with national security operations. She touched the phone screen one final time, and Rivera heard a soft whooshing sound that he assumed meant her report had been transmitted to whatever shadowy authority she answered to. The thought of faceless intelligence officials reviewing his performance made his stomach churn with dread. The Kozlov mission begins tonight, Chun said, slipping the phone back into her jacket with the same casual ease she might use to pocket a piece of gum. I'll be infiltrating their compound in Montenegro, where intelligence indicates they're preparing to auction a shipment of stolen, military-grade explosives to the highest bidder. The operation is expected to last 72 hours, during which time I'll be completely out of contact with conventional military channels. She moved toward the door, but paused with her hand on the handle, turning back to face Rivera one final time. I want you to understand something very clearly, Captain. If this mission fails, if I don't return, or if anything goes wrong that can be traced back to inadequate support from your command, Omega Group will conduct a very thorough investigation into the circumstances. And when Omega Group investigates, they don't limit themselves to reviewing paperwork and conducting interviews. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Rivera felt his bowels clench with terror as he contemplated what such an investigation might entail. Images of black-clad figures appearing in his home at night, of questions asked in soundproof rooms, of consequences that extended far beyond his military career, flooded his consciousness. On the other hand, Chung continued, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. If the mission succeeds, your cooperation will be noted favorably in my after-action report. Omega Group has a long memory for both obstacles and assistance, Captain. I suggest you pray very hard that I come back alive and successful. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, but her voice carried back to him one final time. Oh, and Captain? Everything we've discussed today is classified at levels that would make your security clearance look like a library card. If you mention any aspect of this conversation to anyone, your superiors, your subordinates, your wife, your priest, or your diary, you'll discover that Omega Group's reach extends far beyond military justice. Have a pleasant afternoon. The door closed with a soft click, leaving Rivera alone with the crushing weight of knowledge he wished he had never acquired, and the terrible understanding that he had just encountered something far more dangerous than any enemy he had ever imagined.